Hi, this is Jen Rubin, editor-in-chief of The Contrarian. If it's Monday, it must be Pablo Torre. Welcome, Pablo.
Jen, always good to see you.
Last week was quite a month, huh?
Yesterday was quite a month. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Well, let's start with football. Let's start with college football. Those games, almost without exception, were phenomenally competitive, fun. What does that tell you about the quality in the NCAA right now?
I mean, look, there's a reason why college football is the second most popular television show in America after the NFL, which we will also talk about. So to me, it indicates that as much as there is this entire mess, both legislatively, politically, and certainly in terms of how to regulate college football, because it's
Right.
chaos. It is still very much chaos. The transfer portal is chaos. Frankly, the premise of how to kind of half measure pay these players, also total chaos that's winding its way through the court system. The games themselves remind you why this is a product with billions of dollars waiting for
Yes.
people to mine. And the story, by the way, of Miami playing Indiana, which is a matchup that is not particularly Miami relatively, I suppose, is pedigreed, but Indiana, one of the worst programs in the history of the sport. For 100 years, they were like a laughing stock doormat. And the kind of like fun of Indiana and Kurt Signetti, who's the head coach, and their team is that in this chaos, in the transfer portal, they basically built a team out of all of these guys who are not all cast offs, but on a relative basis, coming from programs that are not hotbeds of NFL prospects. And they're old. They have a whole roster of like older players who come from smaller schools. And so, funny enough, the team that has loved this era more than anybody else is Indiana football. And they seem poised to be the closest thing we have to astride this sport and all of its chaos.
Absolutely. And a coach who came to a program that was really nowhere, that no one had real expectations, who has just been phenomenal.
Yeah. Oh, look, they beat Oregon, right? So Oregon, a power for a long time out on the West Coast, funded by Nike. That's like their big booster. It's still
Yes.
night. And so they've
The
always
team
been
of a
with
thousand
uniforms.
uniforms.
Exactly. Everyone talks about the uniforms and just like the gear, and that's been just the opposite of what Indiana was sort of known for, which is like not cool, not interesting, nothing like that. But the road that they took to get here, Indiana, they beat Oregon, they beat Alabama, they beat Ohio State earlier in the year. They take down the Goliaths on the way to establishing that they are a Goliath too. And by the way, Miami, just as a brief side note here, their story, almost not in the field because there was this whole debate about will
Right.
they make it. Now hosting, essentially, hosting the national championship game in Miami, in South Florida, which is a rare thing because of the quirk of just scheduling. It was always going to be there. Now Miami basically gets to be the home team. There's a bit of a case study in how different the sport is going to be going forward in this particular matchup.
Absolutely. Now, let's put Miami and Indiana aside for just a moment. Which of the players, the quarterbacks in the other teams impressed you the most and did the most to elevate their stature, their draftability, their future perhaps in the portal? Which are the few that really kind of caught your attention?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I mean, look, Notre Dame has this kid, Jeremiah Love, and they weren't even in the field, but he's still going to be the number one overall pick, it seems like, in the NFL draft. So it's just an important reminder, by the way, that like a lot of the stuff that happens on the field, there's still the prospects who exist regardless of whatever
Correct.
happens in the TV shows. But Ruben Bain at Miami, again, will be on the big show. This kid, Caleb Downs out of Ohio State, who's
Yes.
a safety, is excellent. And despite it all, like at Alabama, Ty Simpson, the quarterback, is still someone who is supposed to be, again, like a top 10 pick. So it's interesting. And Oregon also, their quarterback Dante Moore is one of the top quarterbacks that are being projected in the draft. So look, I would say what's interesting, and by the way, tip of the cap to Fernando Mendoza, who's the Indiana quarterback, who was the
Yes.
Heisman winner, who, you know, the idea that he would be a guy, and now he's projected to be a top, 20 pick probably, which reflects the fact that he was not being predicted as anything like this. And now he is
Yes.
like the face of college football. So, as always, my reminder is in the NFL draft, there is hundreds of millions of dollars basically being invested in finding the next great player. That's how important the quarterback is to the fortunes of these billion-dollar teams. And so everything is sort of arranged around finding those guys. And so I mentioned a couple of them, but it is a roulette wheel. It's a roulette wheel in
Yeah.
which you will find that you will be surprised by people taking on, the second and third day of that event.
Let's talk about Mendoza for a moment.
Yeah.
Just his calm, his accuracy, his mobility. He really does seem, and you never know until they get there, to be NFL quality football. What do you think his prospects are, not only in the draft and who knows what order, but for success in the NFL?
Yeah, he's, there's a fun exercise that people refer to sometimes in scouting, where it's like when the guy gets, it's like it's basically like the bus test, meaning guy
Yes.
gets off the bus, what does he look like? And Fernando Mendoza, with all due respect, doesn't ace the bus test. Um, he is an excellent athlete, but the thing that's distinguished himself is composure, is his
Yes.
leadership.
Yes.
And so that's so when we talk about like why can this be a thing that billion-dollar assets turn on? The fortune of those assets turn on the quarterback, and they're so bad at it. It's because the intangibles tend to be the thing that you can't really quantify. And everybody who listens to this kid and has met him and has talked to him talks about his maturity, talks about the way in which
Yes.
he conducts himself almost as if he's already in the NFL and is an adult and is like not a college
Yes.
kid. And the pre-professionalism in that regard is going to be an interesting experiment. I think he's going to be really good, but I think it's going to be a smart pick because of the stuff you can't quite measure.
I agree.
And so
Yeah.
the fact that he is also now officially, by the way, Jenny, he now gets to say he's a winner. Like that's the
Oh,
stamp on it now, where it's like you can reverse
absolutely.
engineer the scouting report based off of that.
So, dare I ask, who do you like in the championship game?
I like Miami. And I say that because of the home sort. I mean, look, any championship game, for those who have not been to a Super Bowl or these events, there are a lot of sponsors. All the business people who have been profiting off of college football show up, right? It's not like as if it's going to be just fans. But the
Right.
fact that there is this sort of cosmic energy to Miami's run, and the fact that they have looked great in this whole in these last 2 months, basically. Well, now, especially in the last couple games they played in the playoffs, they were seeded 10th. I like him to upset Indiana. I like the roulette wheel spinning and landing on a win that the home field crowd can actually celebrate.
Well, I think the ratings are going to be through the roof. Not exactly the kind of TV ratings that consumers and advertisers usually get excited at. Miami, although it's a big city, and Indiana,
No,
no New
you're right.
York, no Los Angeles, but
No,
this is going
no,
to be
no
something else.
SEC, no SEC. That's
No
the big,
SEC.
the macroeconomic sort of like revelation of this postseason, as well as the sports revelation has been the SEC has not adjusted to the new era of chaos and paying players in the transfer portal as well as you would have imagined, and it'll be a fascinating data collection exercise. Whether that matters in terms of the interest in this championship.
Exactly. Then we switch to the NFL. And with the exception of the last game on Sunday evening, these were some of the most exciting, the most extraordinary games. And I gotta say, Philadelphia, who a lot of people had picked to go all the way, is out in one of the most exciting games I've seen in recent years. What was
Yeah.
your overall take on the wild card weekend, which is not over, by the way, because we'll have one more game on Monday?
No, but it's the upside of this mediocrity slash parity that we've been talking about all
Yeah,
year, which is that everybody's kind of on the same level. And so all but the Patriots Chargers game was decided between a score or less. You know,
yeah,
like that's the margin. And so it's been a phenomenal start to the wild card weekend. The NFL always seems to figure out a way to deliver, even when the story has been no one's that impressive. And then you realize if no one's that impressive, then everybody's competitive with each other. And so
yes,
look, what happened to me to the Eagles because of the Niners was so impressive. And so if you didn't
yeah,
see that game, I mean, the Niners lost their star tight end, George Kittle. He had a non
yes, it was
contact
terrible.
ligament injury. And the Niners all year have had injuries, whether it's Nick Bosa, whether it's Fred Warner, Brandon Ayuk, just like stars, actual stars not being able to compete for them. And despite it all, they have been thriving. And so they upset a team with the pedigree in the Eagles. Of course, they were, I think, the logical pick heading into the season alongside the Kansas City Chiefs, both of which, of course, now officially looking very dumb, which is to say, I got this way wrong preseason. But the Niners, coaching, you know, like what happens when
Phenomenal.
you eliminate star players over and over again, you isolate the variable of what your coaches are doing. And so Kyle
Exactly.
Shanahan has put on another clinic this year.
Absolutely. And talk about like the greatest Cinderella story of all time, which was Purdy, who was the
Yeah.
last guy at the last, pick, and now is has a competitive team that is very, very much in the mix for going to the Super Bowl, I think. Obviously, the Patriots showed their mettle, and those of us who are a little tired of the Patriots have to tip our hat and say, okay, they really are good.
Yeah.
Um, are they, in your mind, still the standout, or have you seen maybe Buffalo, maybe one of the other teams? And of course, we haven't seen all the teams. We're going to see that the upcoming week. That kind of piques your interest in terms of a potential underdog.
Yeah, with all due respect to Texans Steelers happening later tonight, I mean, I'm
Yeah.
looking at Josh Allen, I'm thinking to myself, that's still the best player in
Yep.
this whole field. And so, with that in mind, I think Buffalo, just on that basis, is right behind New England to me. New England, I've been just so impressed by for months now.
Right.
And so, them holding the Chargers to 3 points and Drake May looking very comfortable in the second half, especially, makes me very optimistic about the Patriots' chances. I like the Bills right after them, even though the Bills just survived the Jaguars. And I say
Yeah.
just survived because the Jaguars were one of the hottest teams in football, and they
Yes, they were.
came they
They
came
were.
within inches of upsetting Buffalo. But I think it's Patriots, it's Bills in the AFC in terms of the top two teams, and then yeah, the Niners and the Rams to me. With all due respect to Caleb Williams and the Bears, who just upset the Packers in a massive win, by the way, incredibly
Yeah, yeah.
fun to watch the Bears beat the Packers in the playoffs for the first time in decades. I think actually
Yes.
they hadn't beat the Packers since 1941 in the postseason, I think. And so they were wearing like cheese grater foam hats,
Yes.
which I love, and they're shredding cheese post game. Caleb Williams, their
Yeah, yeah.
quarterback, was. Despite
Yeah.
all of that, I think that the Rams are a cut above, and above them, still somehow the Niners. So yeah, I think it's looking like that.
Right. Absolutely. Well, we'd be remiss if we didn't go to the best investigative reporter in sports these days and ask what's new in the investigations of the various issues you've been following.
Yeah, we just did an episode on Friday, which I hope people can check out. It's on our YouTube channel as well as in our podcast feed. It's the seventh part of our investigation into Steve Ballmer and Aspiration and the Clippers. And
Yes.
so, in brief, what happened was that the NBA hired a white shoe law firm that's very, very decorated, Jen, Wachtell Lipton, Rosen and Katz, to investigate the story, which is to say, like, follow the footsteps and expand it, ideally, of my investigation. And uh, what I can report and what we tell the story of in this episode at the very top is that Wachtell brought me in for an interview, and they requested documents. And so the episode that I bring you, because the meeting beyond that was off the record, the episode I bring you is the documents I decided to give them. And so I respect the rules of like when I walk in the door of their offices, we're not going to talk about this in public. But in terms of what I resolved to give them as a matter of substantiating the claims and the reporting I have done, as well as give them directions to look into in a good faith effort, that is what you can hear and see the story of in this episode. Because the spoiler alert here is that the story of aspiration, this now bankrupt climate change startup that Steve Ballmer used, according to our reporting, to pay Kawhi Leonard beyond the salary cap, the cardinal sin of the NBA and its rule book. The story of that actually begins years before 2021, which is when that deal was signed. And we fall further down into a rabbit hole that explains why the story Steve Ballmer, the richest owner in sports, has been telling people does not hold up to scrutiny, and in fact kind of falls apart in hilarious ways. So that's 3 months in the making that we just dropped on Friday.
So it was quite a risk for them to bring you in some respects. It's also a sign of how badly they need you because you've done so much of the legwork. Did you get the sense that they are on the up and up, that they are serious people, that they really want to get to the bottom of this?
I will say that they reached out to me to express that we are serious people who want to get to the bottom of this. And so that on that level, I genuinely appreciated. My degree of cynicism around this process, though, is beyond the individual investigators. It's really, and I want to, in good faith, just take them at the presentation face value that they presented because they have the documents. We'll see what they do with them. But my real cynicism is around the fundamental process of Adam Silver, the NBA commissioner, investigating not only one of his bosses, but like the richest boss that he has. And so, as you know, when a company is dealing with an internal matter, we're talking about collective bargaining violations and the salary cap. We're not talking about breaking the law. And
Yes.
so the question that I had and continue to have for Wachtell and for the NBA, which of course is employing them, is who is gonna really speak to you guys? Because they don't have subpoena power. They don't have the ability to just demand documents if these are not NBA employees. And this is a
Right.
story that I reported from outside of the NBA through this company. So when they replace their footsteps, they're going to have to do what I did in 7 months in some sort of time frame. Now, granted, with the force and might of a truly top shelf law firm and its staff and budget and billable hours economy, which I don't personally have the advantage of. But I think that if they're really trying to get to the bottom of this, it's going to be extraordinarily uncomfortable for the NBA to have to deal with if they're going to
Absolutely.
prioritize the truth over their conflicts of interest.
Absolutely. And unlike the current situation, when you're a private company, that the report comes and is not disclosable to the public, everyone is going to want to see that report.
Yeah.
So it's going to be hard. The thing that I always worry about in these internal investigations is the lawyers do their job and then it gets buried, sunk, modified, by the employer. I don't think the NBA and the Clippers are going to be able to do that because the human cry to see what it was that Wachtell found is going to make it incredibly difficult for these people to say attorney-client privilege. We're not sending over the original document. I don't think that's going to fly in this case.
Yeah, it's a very savvy observation. Like, what will the report look like? And is there any way that they can bury that report? Or, again, it's hard not to think of like redactions these days. But I
Yes,
am very
exactly.
curious, like, how blunt are you going to be about what you found? And if the only pressure that they have that governs their freedom to tell us nothing is public outcry, as you put it, this happens to be a story with like vast and surprisingly intense public interest. So there is that concern. But short of that, because it's an internal investigation, they can kind of do whatever they want. And so that's exactly right. That's the tension in terms of what the public ends up getting to discover about this.
Absolutely. We have to talk about what is going on the streets of America. The tragic, inexcusable, horrifying killing of Renee Good, a young mother sitting in her car, shot in the face, then denied medical care after the shooting. And the response that we saw this weekend, I was out on the streets covering it, others were out as well, of dignified, righteous anger that the American people are finding. And as we know from the Wall Street Journal, of all places, this isn't an isolated event. These people are out of control and on the streets of America. How, in that environment, does America host the Olympics, the World Cup? Are people going to want to come? Are the teams going to want to come? How do these two realities collide when you usually have these concerns about a authoritarian country like China, but in China they do a better job of cleaning it up and hiding their really atrocities. What do you think is going to happen as these international sports events come to the United States?
I think it's an open question as to whether they happen. And I say that just because the rate at which things are proceeding suggests a level of chaos that nobody should want to wander into. And I think that we're day to day on pretty much anything happening as scheduled with this
Yes.
administration. And I don't think they have like contingencies or really a strategy for how to make this happen without international incident. And so
Yeah.
let's now presume that the sheer desire to host these events for money, PR reasons, motivate this administration to get it together to have these events happen in the United States. The concern that I have, bigger picture, is around what ICE is revealing to us, which is that they are occupying American cities like they are third world military forces. And
Absolutely.
this government simultaneously, in the case of Renee Good in Minneapolis, which of course was, a locus of sports protest back in 2020, what they are also claiming, ICE and Kristi Noem and JD Vance and everybody else, is that the guy who shot this mother in the face multiple times when his life was not actually in danger, um, he's the actual victim. Like
Yeah,
that's the degree of argument that they're making is not merely that
exactly.
you can't understand how hard it is in the line of fire. They are telling us actually he's the victim and she's a domestic terrorist. And
Right.
so the sports angle here, because you talked about this too, way back when, was Scotty Scheffler. Remember when Scotty Scheffler was trying to drive into that golf tournament and there was a cop who stopped him and the cop was sort of like, kind of like lightly bounced off the car because Scotty was trying to turn in to the gates of the event. Um, Scotty Scheffler was not shot and killed, and no one suggested that he should have been put into prison because this cop had clumsily put himself in a position to get grazed by an automobile. I am not saying that it's not extraordinarily dangerous what police officers, and these are, again, in the case of ICE, not police officers, but something else. These guys who get hired in ways that are not clearly up
Yes.
to snuff. I'm not saying that's not dangerous. I'm merely saying that we are being sold a story that is beyond the pale in terms of evidence, in terms of morality. It is something that is terrifying if you think that a lot of people from other countries coming into America at the same time, filling the streets, is anything but a recipe for disaster if those guys are going to be around.
I agree. I agree. And both because it is first and it is proximate in time to these events, and because soccer is so heavily supported by South Americans, Central Americans, I think that is the one that is obviously most at risk. And remember, it's being split. It's being
Yep.
split with Canada and Mexico. So ultimately, they do have a solution, which is they push those events into those countries. Now, going up against Donald Trump is not going to be anybody's idea of a picnic. And by the way, when does he have to give back the Peace Prize? When he invades Denmark or when he bombs Iran, or he just gets
Yeah,
to keep that.
it's when he gets the Nobel from the actual rightful winner of it because he's been
Yes,
demanding that in exchange for control of
right.
Venezuela.
By the way, I found that hysterical. It's like, you can give me your bowling trophy. It doesn't mean I won the bowling tournament. It's like, only Donald Trump thinks that way. Really? Like, you didn't win it, guys, But be that as it may, I think the pressure on not only FIFA, but the national teams, if you're the Brazilian team, the Venezuelan team, the Chilean team, all of these teams, are you going to come to the United States with your players and your fans in this kind of atmosphere? I find it almost inconceivable.
Yeah, I don't understand how anyone would feel comfortable with this. But by the way, um, we are looking at a year full of sports and politics collisions by the design of this administration. We
Yeah.
have the G7 rescheduling itself to make room for the MMA fight at the White House in June, which is Donald Trump's big birthday party. We got the World Cup coming up, the Olympics in the distance. Like it's we're only beginning the ways in which people who work in the world of sports are going to have to figure out how to deal with this administration. And I want to bring it back to just Minneapolis for a second, the Twin Cities, because the Timberwolves took a moment of silence for Renee
Yes.
Good, put her on the Jumbotron, and someone, by the way, amid the silence at the very end, yelled, "Go home, ice," and the entire arena cheered. Um, we have not seen sports be activated by this term in the way that it was in the first one. 2020 obviously being the high watermark. And I
Yes.
am very interested as to how sports is going to be forced, because Trump is daring them, forced to have to engage with the real world, as we often call it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That is going to be the story. And it speaks to how international sports has become and how this administration has lost control of the streets of the United States. And that sports ultimately is a public event with public gatherings, not only in stadiums, but on the streets, in bars, in restaurants, and all the rest of it. It is going to be fascinating. And I hope, because they have so frequently in the past rise to the occasion. People like Steve Kerr, people around the sport who understand that sports is sports, but it also means something so much more. And maybe in some peculiar way, sports can help us reclaim some common ground and our shared humanity. That would be a great development for 2026.
At the very least, there'll be a thing we pay attention to, which means that eyes and ears and oxygen are going to be pointed towards a platform, and it's up to sports to decide what do we want to do with this, given the thing that's happening oftentimes right outside the door of any given arena.
Absolutely. Absolutely. As always, Pablo, fascinating and more than ever, sports, politics, race, immigration, economics, law. You can't really separate any of them anymore. It's all tied up in a knot. That's why it's so much fun talking about all of them. Have a wonderful week. Enjoy your Monday night game and enjoy next weekend. And we will be back next Monday.
See you
Take care.
Monday. Thanks, Jen.